Yeah, I'm talking about Skylanders again. I know I'm supposed to diversify my content and all that, but like, this video just dropped the most confusing cutscene in Skylanders history, and as someone who really likes the lore and the theories surrounding it and getting into arguments about it, I come on, I couldn't help myself. Listen, it's final season. I just got done with two tests today. I'm gonna treat myself. What do you want from me? Anyway, this is the most confusing cutscene in Skylanders history by Neon Batteries. I'm kind of familiar with this creator. The main reason I know them is because I have a friend and colleague in a few fan games who is a frequent commenter on Neon Batteries lore videos because Neon Batteries just looks at the wiki and sometimes gets stuff wrong. Um, there's a whole situation there. But I actually haven't watched a lot of their videos yet. I've only seen them pop up in the recommended, saved a lot to the watch later. So let's see what this one is about. For context, the thumbnail of this video was a cutscene from the beginning of Giants, which was, I admit, pretty confusing. It does potentially break lore in a few cases, but hey, I've got my own theory on how a lot of the weird inconsistencies in Skylanders lore actually does make sense, so let's see what happens here.
When it comes to Skylanders as a franchise, it's pretty clear that the figures are one of the biggest and most important aspects of it right next to the games themselves. There's a reason why there are so many different variants of figures throughout the history of the franchise. Recolors, Chase, both legendary versions, light cores, reposes, darks, all of them were pretty much made to squeeze more money out of people who played the games. But they're also a part of Skyland's lore as well. The toys are the frozen and shrunken versions of the Skylanders whenever they get sent to Earth for whatever reason, and we get to see this happen in a cutscene for almost every single Skylanders game, except for Superchargers and Imaginators where they just show off the teams. And interestingly enough, before Trap Team, Skylanders rarely made appearances outside of these specific cutscenes until Skylanders Trap Team, where they made appearances in in-game cutscenes since specific Skylanders rarely have a story presence except for the rare cases or its Imaginators. What I'm basically trying to say is that Skylanders don't really end up in cutscenes a lot, and because of that, a lot of us are going to notice when they do end up in cutscenes. And if we exclude all the times after swap floors, there's only 3 times where the Skylanders show up like this. 2 instances in SSA, the first initial fight with Chaos and when he's sent to Earth at the end of the game, and a singular instance in Giants. And this one cutscene alone is a deep rabbit hole. This is something within the Skylanders franchise that I don't think I've seen before, a short span of time packed with so much stuff to talk about. So I decided to go through the scene and try my best to figure out how the hell this all could possibly make sense. But before we fully jump into the scene, let's get some context first. Alright, so to properly understand what's going on, we have to go over a specific cutscene from Spyro's Adventure, and that's the ending cutscene of that game. Now, after you defeat Chaos and his High Dragon, we cut to the Skylanders and their allies surrounding Chaos, who's trapped in a magical cage. He calls out to Eon and tells him that even if he sends him back to the Outlands, he'll just keep coming back again and again until Skylands is under his control. Eon showing up and telling him that they aren't going to send him back to the Outlands. Chaos is confused about what Eon means until he explains that he has something more fitting in mind for him and gives Hugo the honors. And as Hugo begins the process, Chaos begins, or attempts to bargain with everyone present, only for Hugo to go on, almost toying with Chaos before they launch him away to Earth. Spyro, Trigger Happy, and Gilgrunt all celebrating their victory. Remember this part. This is very important for later. We actually get to see Chaos go through the part of the process where he gets smaller, but strangely enough, he isn't frozen, as implied by what we hear when he eventually reaches his destination.
What? Where? Where am I? Oh, what's that smell? Ah! A horrible monster! Oh, yeah! Cut it out! This is no way to treat your emperor! Oh, this stinks!
How can you not like this series, dude? Like, come on. I mean, I know I did tear it to shreds a bit in the last video I did, but that's besides the point.
We're then congratulated by Master Eon over a victory over Chaos, and that's pretty much where the cutscene ends. Now, I know that this scene raises a couple of questions in and of itself, but we'll talk about that sooner than you think. So with all of that said and done, let's actually get into the cutscene that we're actually here to talk about. Now, the cutscene begins with an establishing shot of a store called Super Toy Planet. We then pan through the store and eventually pan over to Frozen Chaos on a shelf. And from here, we already have a pretty big question. First things first, how did Chaos get frozen? Even though we couldn't see him, we could clearly tell that he was somewhat mobile since he could talk, and he didn't freeze while he was in the wormhole thing like all the other Skylanders. Even in this game here, and to add on to this, Chaos's pose was different when he was in the wormhole, so he had to shift his position somehow. Now, I racked my head around this for a long while, and I'm honestly not sure how this could have happened.
I can take a stab at it. So, the thing is, the Skylanders on the way to Earth did not immediately freeze, right? Like, truth be told, I don't remember if this was in the in-game cutscene or in the promotional material, but I'm pretty sure that there's a shot where, like, their limbs kind of get forced into position. Yeah, I don't remember which one it is, but, like, it happens during the journey, and it's like, we don't see a lot of Chaos's path to Earth, like, what he's actually doing, right? Like, we see a few seconds of it, then it cuts to the comet trail for quite a bit before he crash lands. So it's like, it's not unreasonable to say he might have gotten frozen there. The question then becomes, okay, well, he's talking, right? But the Giants cutscene has the Skylanders talking to Chaos despite being frozen, which I assume this video is going to get into that, but like that also doesn't make sense because, you know, last I checked, you need to move your mouths to talk, but it's like, it's one of two explanations, I think. One, frozen figures in Skylands can just still communicate somehow. Like, they can still make sounds with their mouths despite their mouths not moving and whatnot. And they just coincidentally don't do it in real life when the players are around for some reason. Or two, it's not diegetic. We're just hearing Chaos's thoughts somehow. Truth be told, the cutscenes in Skylanders don't make a lot of sense in and of themselves if you assume that the framing device is meant to be taken literally. Some people, funnily enough, including my friend from earlier, we've had discussions about this, like, will pitch the idea that the exposition of Skylanders games is not meant to be taken entirely literally. So I'm of the belief that because of the way the framing device is laid out, like Eon says, hey, the Skylanders are from Skylands, they've come to Earth, you are an active player in the story. Everything the player experiences is canon to the series, which does cause some potential problems of explaining weird gameplay mechanics, like the fact that in stores there's clearly multiple of the same character being sold, that sort of thing. The opposing side is the idea that it's not meant to be taken entirely literally. Canonically, the Skylanders get sent to Earth, one of each. There is a Portal Master or a couple of Portal Masters. Sources actually vary on that between singular or plural. That send the Skylanders back to Skylands. And what happens there is that the figures being on the portal and staying in the house, like after you take them off, that's not diegetic. What happens in the series is that they just actually teleport back to Skylands. So, all this to say, you could make the argument that the cutscenes can't be diegetic in some cases. Now, I've always kind of headcanoned that if a cutscene doesn't make sense for us to be seeing in some situations, it's just Eon using magic to guide us. A few times he even kind of hints at that in cutscenes, like he'll show up, he'll give out a magic projection, or he'll just blatantly say, hey, I'm going to show you, like in the first level in Giants, he says beforehand, hey, I'm going to show you what happened to the Archean Conquertron and what really kickstarted the war against the Archean Empire, that sort of thing. Again, all that to say, we can see things in cutscenes that aren't meant to be taken literally, probably, in some cases, and I think that's one of them. So Chaos could just be thinking that indignantly. Like, I mean, that dog doesn't seem very frightened by what it sees as a chew toy yelling at him.
So he had to shift his position somehow. Now, I racked my head around this for a long while, and I'm honestly not sure how this could have happened. At first, I thought his process was slower since he was a Dark Portal Master, but even if that was the case, then how did he unfreeze himself? I did a little bit of research on what could have possibly led to this, but the only thing that I was able to figure out is that Chaos broke free because he was a Dark Portal Master.
Where the heck would you have found that out? I don't think any source says that. Like, I know Neon Batteries primarily uses the wiki for stuff. They've explicitly mentioned that in a few points. I browsed the wiki quite a bit. I don't think I've ever seen that tossed around. It also kind of just doesn't make sense on the face of it. Like, I guess he's a powerful magic user, but, like, there are magic Skylanders, right? Like, the Giants, for instance, are basically just gods among men, and they have Ninjini, who is said to be like who is the most powerful sorceress of her era, basically. So it's like, wouldn't that also apply to her? Couldn't she unfreeze herself? You could maybe make the argument that the Skylanders are choosing to stay frozen just because they're loyal to the Portal Master, but like, again, if they can talk, wouldn't they communicate that? This, I admit, is a fair point. There isn't really an explanation given for why Chaos broke free. I mean, in the cutscene itself... Wait, no, that's not what he says. I was going to reference the line that, like, when Stump Smash says, "If I could move, I'd drop the hammer on you right now," and Chaos just says, "Aw, you can't, can you? Because I'm a Portal Master and you're not." Which, like... Again, that doesn't really mean anything. Yeah, it's bizarre. I don't know. Let's see what happens next.
But how? In the cutscene itself, he didn't even know that he somehow ended up in a toy store, so he couldn't have possibly been aware enough to actually do this on his own. But I also heard somewhere else that since he was a Dark Portal Master, the effects could have worn off over time.
Wait a sec, I just realized. Why would his eyes freeze shut? That actually never occurred to me before that. Like, I mean, again, I don't know how the process of freezing into your pose works, but, like, the Skylanders all go into battle-ready poses for the most part. Chaos is almost that. Like, he's kind of in a cool pose, but why would his eyes close? I guess if he fell asleep, but, like... Presumably, again, this goes into the different schools of thought. If you believe the figures are physically the Skylanders and that everything the Portal Master experiences is canon, this is an inconsistency because the Skylanders never close their eyes. If you believe they have some mobility and that not everything is explicitly canon, then maybe they do fall asleep. Who's to say? One of the books... The Skylanders Book of Elements, Magic, and Tech does pitch the idea that the Skylanders are conscious while frozen. Admittedly, that's an NPC largely just thinking, like speculating about it. There's a section for each Skylanders bio where it says frozen thoughts, and Hugo just discusses what they might be thinking while they're frozen. So it's not necessarily true that they're conscious. It's hard to say. Because I feel like it could go either way. On the one hand, like... Actually, no, cut that. I mean, it would make sense if they're not conscious, because you put them on the portal, and their first thought is to strike a cool pose, say their catchphrase, and just jump into battle, instead of thinking, "Oh my god, finally I can move again," and just, like... doing a little dance or something. I don't know. That's probably what I'd do in that situation.
And even though that kinda answers how he unfroze, it doesn't tell us how he got to that state in the first place. Anyways, after Chaos unfreezes, he questions where he is before he begins to remember what happened to him.
And birthed 1,000 memes in the process. Love him for that.
So, if he didn't make it to the toy store by himself, then how did he get here? Okay, now that I'm actually breaking this video down, it's becoming way more of a mess than I initially realized.
It's funny that Neon Batteries said that, considering I just had the same problem.
Okay, now for this one, there are two options on what could have possibly happened. Either A, he's always been in the toy store and he just forgot somehow, or B, he was brought here and it's pretty obvious that it's B. But that raises the huge question of when and how did he even get here in the first place? And what sucks is that I don't have a single clue on how this could have possibly happened. Yes, he crash landed on Earth, specifically somewhere in Tanzania, but we just don't have enough information. Yes, we did hear him crash through something, which was probably a roof of some sort, but we still don't know what that roof belonged to. It could have been a store, it could have been a home, hell, it could have even been the roof of a doghouse since the dog was right there when he landed. So
I don't think it's that hard to speculate. I've always held the belief that presumably the Skylanders were found as figures. They looked like toys. So some Activision or Toys for Bob employee rang up their boss and said, hey, you want to make some money? And then they just packaged them, sold them to retailers, and then the Portal Masters bought them. Presumably something similar could have happened here. Chaos crash lands through a place, a house, presumably. A dog starts trying to eat him. Presumably the dog has a family. The humans in that family see the toy, think, huh, that's weird. I didn't get that for this dog. And then either they own the toy store and they just sell it after cleaning him up, or maybe they lose him. It doesn't really matter how he got there, but it's not unrealistic. There's a lot of different ways he could have gotten in that situation.
my personal headcanon is that he crashed in or near a warehouse of some sort, since we did hear metal sounds when he crashed. Once he froze, the workers there just thought he was a toy that somehow got out of his box, and then shipped him over to the Super Toy Planet, which could still be within the country since Tanzania has Swahili and English as its national languages. After he remembers that—
Well, and also you don't translate titles a lot of the time. If we assume Super Toy Planet is a branch, then presumably they'd keep the name the same. It is kind of weird that a multinational chain wouldn't have a physical location. Again, this is if you assume everything is canon. If you assume everything is canon, it's kind of weird that no Skylanders player has seen a store that looks like this and has that name specifically. You know, maybe there is. Maybe there's a patent for Super Toy Planet out there somewhere, and I'm just wrong.
that he was banished, he swears to himself that once he takes over Skylands, he's going to come back and destroy the toy store, only to hear a familiar voice say that he would like to see him try. Chaos asking who said that before he cut over to a group of Skylanders. Remember that thing I told you to remember when we talked about how Chaos even ended up on Earth in the first place? Well, if you remember, you know that there were 3 Skylanders present when he was banished. Trigger Happy, Gilgrunt, and Spyro.
Which also makes no sense, because... Okay. If we go with the opposing school of thought that I don't believe in, then why is it only these 3 here? How is it... like... Presumably... Like, does this imply that throughout the entirety of Spyro's adventure, this off-screen Portal Master that isn't technically a real-life player of the game just didn't buy any other Skylanders? Because it's like, okay, whatever. You believe that the figures staying in your house isn't diegetic. You send these 3 to Skylands, they do their thing, whatever, that's fine. But like that's a lot of people that are just sort of in the canon of this cutscene, I suppose. They're just kind of left to rot. It's messed up.
Now, this alone raises a crap load of questions since at this point in time, Spyro and Gilgrunt should be in Skylands, and they're both somehow frozen as statues here.
Yup.
Which is impossible since we saw them both present in Skylands. How the hell can they be a toy on Earth and be physically present in Skylands at the same time? Not even their
And because if you've played this game to understand what's going on, you've probably played Spyro's Adventure. The games do account for the fact that not every player would have played every game in order. Eon's monologues at the beginning of the game, and Chaos's in Superchargers, they try to strike a balancing act between, like, they address things in a way that makes sense if you're a newer player, but also doesn't really contradict the idea that an older player is returning. Like, Eon seems familiar with you, but he also seemed familiar with you in Spyro's Adventure, because he basically just sort of inserts himself into the situation as your mentor figure. The beginning of Giants directly plays off of Spyro's Adventure, right? And the thing is, even if you accept my idea that everything in Skylands is diegetic, how the heck does this cutscene make sense? Like, your figures are on the portal. You can have 3 figures on the portal at the same time. Even if you're playing multiplayer, you only get up to 2. If you try to put anything else on there, it just says there are too many toys on the portal of power. So, either way, this cutscene just does not make sense. Honestly, that's just glorious.
series figures could answer this because their bases are green and they're not the orange that the Series 2 figures have. The only possible explanation that I really have is that the Skylanders must have somehow split into thousands of different statues on the way down, or that the figures we use are replicas of the original Skylanders sent to Earth.
So, this is something I've been theorizing about since early childhood. The idea of, like, okay, if these are specific individual characters, how the heck do duplicates exist in stores? It's not just like duplicates of the same figure. Reposes exist, and they have different upgrades. And it's like, it's easy enough to explain if you believe that, again, not everything is diegetic, because it's like, oh, okay, it's the same Skylander, you're commanding them in Skylands, but over time they just learned the ability to get this new move. And it's like, whatever, but as Neon Batteries correctly points out, even that doesn't make sense, because there has to be 2 Spyros and 2 Gilgrunts for this to make sense. Right? If you believe everything is diegetic, then regardless of the explanation for it, you do know multiple of the same figure can exist. So this isn't unfeasible, I guess. If for some reason you decided after the Chaos fight, you and a friend are specifically and only playing 2 of the starter pack Skylanders, you decide to put a 3rd figure on the portal during the cutscene, even though that never works in gameplay. And then at that point, you have the 3 of them in Skylands doing their thing, doing actions that you don't command them to because you're not doing any controller inputs. And then suddenly, and then a different Spyro and Gilgrunt are just at the toy store communicating as if they have minds of their own. And it's like, again, I don't know what's going on. It's not unreasonable to say that, well, maybe they're just cloned somehow. At some point, the Skylanders got cloned and all of the clones got sent to Earth. And some of the clones have better upgrades for some reason. Until you start to think, well, wait a minute. How would that happen? Why would that happen? There's precedent for that sort of thing in the series. Legendaries, the gold and navy blue ones you saw earlier, they actually have 2 sets of lore about them. One is from the comics, which do have all the Skylanders back in Skylines and do present some lore inconsistencies in ways that make me think they're not necessarily canon, they're just fun, like, what-if scenarios, right? And that says that the Legendaries are just suits of armor for the Skylanders. But the other explanation I don't remember where it originally came from, but there was a bio on, I think, Skylanders.com that said that the Legendaries are statues that you get of yourself if you're a Skylander that participates in a special tournament and wins, I think. and the statues come to life in times of peril. So it's like they're technically clones, so there's some kind of precedent, but like, who the heck are these other duplicates then? We actually had an interesting discussion, me and a bunch of other people that are working on a Skylanders fan game. We talked about the idea that the individual Skylanders are the only ones, but when they got sent to Earth, somehow, some way, the different duplicates figures of them aren't them specifically. They're just like, their consciousness shattered or something. Which kind of makes sense. I mean, it sort of explains why. It sort of explains why there would be duplicates, and why they only respond to controller inputs, and why they don't talk to you. I guess it could be like Percy Jackson rules, where it's like the core Skylander is somewhere, and they have to manifest all the different parts of them somehow. But like, even that doesn't feel super conclusive, because again, how would that and why would that happen?
Maybe copies of the originals. So for now, let's talk about the former. Now, the biggest reason that I think this is because in the Skylanders games, if you're playing multiplayer, it's possible that you could play the same Skylander as two separate characters. As long as you have two figures, it would work. But then there's another factor that we have not brought up until now, and that's the fact that the Skylanders are on display, which probably means that these Skylanders are being sold. Does that mean Toys for Bob and all the other companies that worked on Skylanders are canon to this universe? I mean, the only way that the figure clones could have possibly ended up in the display case while they technically returned to Skylands in the last game is if Skylands figures are being sold at the Super Toy Planet. But if that's the case, things get really confusing.
Yeah,
now,
well then why would they be
biggest things that we
speaking?
need to solve here is if the actual toys are talking or if we're dealing with predetermined voice lines, because there's evidence for both. You could say that these lines are predetermined since Chaos was completely frozen and didn't know where or how he got to the toy store at all, implying that he was completely frozen to the point that time basically froze for him, but you could also argue that he just had his eyes closed. But as a counterpoint, he didn't mention hearing anything. And it could possibly be that the Skylanders are actually talking due to the fact that their and Chaos's audios are the same and they sound like they are responding to him.
Yeah, like they're actively like playing off of him. And those are lines we don't hear anywhere else in the game. Like nowhere else in the Skylanders games, like in like gameplay or in cutscenes, does Spyro say, "I'd like to see you try, Chaos." Nor in like demos or anything, to my knowledge. So that can't be it. I mean, unless this specific machine has the voice lines in it. But even then, that doesn't make sense because it wouldn't be on. The store's clearly closed. It's dark. No one's in there. So why would this machine be on and be playing lines without any like human input?
Take a listen.
Frozen with fear in my awesome presence.
If I could move, I'd be dropping the hammer on you right now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No matter what option you believe is true, both of them are always going to open a massive rabbit hole on how Toys for Bob and in turn, every other game studio or company somewhat involved in Skylanders as a franchise works. And to be frank, that would take way too long to explain every single one of them. But I will leave a brief list on screen.
Oh, okay. Oh, they even addressed the two schools of thought. That's cool. All the figures are sentient. How did Toys for Bob make clones of the Skylanders, and or how did the Skylanders split on their way to Earth? Talked about this? No idea. Did Toys for Bob make the portals, and how? Let me spin a yarn for you. Someone at Toys for Bob finds the figures and finds one of the figures, say. A Toys for Bob employee finds Gilgrunt. They feel a sort of spiritual connection to Gilgrunt. So they ring up their boss and say, "Hey boss, I've got $1 million idea." Toys for Bob goes on a hunt across the country, finds a bunch of Skylanders. If we're going with the logic of this cutscene, maybe Spyro just talks to this employee directly. Maybe Gilgrunt, rather. Maybe this is the original Gilgrunt, which is question 4. This is the original Gilgrunt. This Gilgrunt can talk. This Gilgrunt explains the situation. And the Toys for Bob employee is like, "Oh shoot, a portal master, that must be me." And there could be like a Harry Potter story where like that employee has done weird magic all their life, fine, whatever. And that weird employee figures out how to make a small portal, and then Activision markets it as a game, makes $1 billion, yada, yada, yada. Doesn't explain the clone thing, but it's something. And then for all the figures aren't sentient, are we playing alongside the game as it's happening, or is it a retelling? If all the figures aren't sentient, then presumably the game also couldn't be, because that does deviate from the framing device, which means no, what we're experiencing in the game is not explicitly canon exactly. How do the figures function the same as Skylanders if they aren't actually the Skylanders? Well, because then that becomes a gameplay mechanic. Because if we're going with this school of thought, the events of Skylanders did happen, just not as the way we're playing them. So we're just playing a game in this situation. We're just playing a game based off of the events that happened in Skylands. If this is like Toys for Bob doing a based on a true story type thing. Are they more as tools to summon the Skylanders? Potentially. I mean, you could make the argument that, like, the figures might not be the bodies of the Skylanders. You put them on the portal and it calls the soul of the Skylander into action. But that doesn't address the fact that, like, as Neon Batteries points out, two Skylanders can be played in the same session at the same time. Truth be told, the multiverse doesn't exist in the Skylanders, which opens that whole can of worms. But, like, maybe... Oh, you know what it could be? I actually have been thinking about this for a while. So, what if the explosion... Okay, so for whatever reason, explosions in Skylanders have massive butterfly effects. Like, in Trap Team, for instance, Chaos blows up a magic prison, basically, and it just shatters space-time down the middle and releases two elements that nobody knew about, light and dark, basically. So, maybe, just maybe, no, that doesn't make sense. I was going to say that the explosion of the core of light was like a multiversal constant, maybe. So every Skylander every variation of every Skylander from the different multiverses, well, not all of them. Like Academy, for instance, is a different continuity. Those guys are clearly still in Skylands kicking. But like every Skylander from every universe, mostly, present company excluded, I suppose, all get sent to the same Earth. And that accounts for that, I suppose. You could probably make the same argument for Trap Team because, again, Cloudcracker Prison had massive ramifications. The Swap Force got sent away because they were in the core of the Magic Volcano. So that's less of a thing. Superchargers explicitly has the Sky Eater tear holes in the sky that can open rifts to other universes. So you could make the argument for something similar there. Giants is the main problem, though, because in that, the Iron Fist of Arcus goes haywire, basically, and it sweeps the Giants away in, like, a last resort attack. That would not be a multiversal constant. And there are duplicates of the Giants. I've got nothing.
Because we need to get to the rest of the cutscene, and these aren't even all of them. After Chaos taunts the frozen Skylanders, the power of the Super Toy Planet goes out as Glumshanks manages to find him and contact him through a TV connected to a different display with a portal of power on it, telling Chaos that he was transported to Earth, the home of the Portal Masters, before Chaos eventually sees the portal and plans to use it to get back to Skylands.
Wait a minute, hold on. Okay, wait. First off, this geography doesn't make a whole lot of...
The power of the Super Toy Planet goes out as Glumshanks manages...
Wait, he just turns on the
Find
spot,
him and contact him through a
which means the shelf of Skylanders should be
connected
right
to a
next to
different
him.
display with a portal of power on it, telling Chaos that he was transported to Earth, the home of the Portal Masters, before Chaos eventually sees
But it's not. That's something else entirely. What the heck? He does not move from that shelf. He doesn't, like, descend a level or anything. Why is that not the Skylanders case? I'm only just realizing this. That's odd. Also, obviously, I don't know how Glumshanks got a feed directly to Earth. I guess the same methods that we would use to hook a TV up to Skylands. But, like, how did he find Chaos?
the portal and plans to use it to get back to Skylands. Chaos bidding the Skylanders goodbye before screwing around with the...
Okay, I guess if the teddy bear is there, then that's not... No, even that doesn't make sense, because it's like, that wasn't visible in the last... Right? And that seems like too much distance to cover. I know I'm harping on this when this isn't relevant, but like, this is odd.
Portal for a second, and by screwing around, he's basically just dipping his toes into it. Glumshanks tries to warn Chaos against using the display portal since Portal Masters aren't really supposed to use them on themselves, but Chaos basically tells him to shut up before jumping into the portal. Nothing really happening at first before Chaos is electrocuted and pulled through the portal. And that's pretty much where the cutscene ends, or at least the part that I really wanted to talk about. Now, the last thing that I really want to talk about...
I just realized another reason why Imaginators doesn't make sense. Okay, so truth be told, Swap Force contradicts this too. Chaos's mom actively uses a portal in her boss fight, and she hides in the player's portal. So the idea that Portal Masters can't use portals themselves doesn't really make sense. But you could easily chalk that up to Chaos's mom just being a better Dark Portal Master, right? But in Imaginators, they introduce a playable Skylander who is an exact clone of Chaos. And you can use him on the Portal of Power just fine.
Is how Portal Masters aren't allowed to use portals on themselves, which I think is extremely clever to explain why people can't just use a portal to get the Skylands and vice versa.
Well, yeah, you could say that, but I would say that, like, even if Portal Masters could use portals on themselves, we couldn't use the portals that we get in the starter pack because they're too small. It wouldn't be able to... We'd have to, like, put a foot on it, and that wouldn't... It just wouldn't account for everything. Like, it wouldn't envelop all of us. You could say, well, why doesn't it just only take your foot to Skylands and slice it off and leave the rest of you behind? And it's like, presumably the people who make portals would have accounted for that, right?
But it does make me wonder if it's because it could potentially lead to dark corruption. The only two Dark Portal Masters we've seen have used portals in ways that require them to go into the portal. Chaos is stunned here, and Cassandra hiding in your portal during your fight with her in Swap Force. Even still, when Chaos used it on himself, he didn't suffer that much of a negative effect from it. He was just spit out at a random location when he was charged with a ton of energy. But it's clearly survivable. But it still could have been Chaos just getting lucky, since this is the only time we've really seen something like this happen. In conclusion, is this cutscene bad? Hell no. It creates so many different questions that you can explore, and not only that, but they managed to make a meta scene without it ending up as being cringy, which is something that is really damn hard to do successfully.
It's also just funny. Like, it's a pretty funny cutscene. Like, the bit with the Skylanders is dumb, but it's like, Chaos destroys a toy store for no other reason than he just doesn't like the look of the place, basically. Well, I mean, he doesn't actually destroy it, but he, like, considers it. But, like, that's just funny. Chaos getting, like, slobbered on by a dog is funny. Him just, like, actually kind of being able to successfully just, like, give the Skylanders an L by just, like, dancing all over their frozen bodies is just cool. It's a good cutscene.
And even though it raises a lot of questions that don't exactly have solid answers, I still believe that this is one of the most standout cutscenes in the Skylanders franchise. But with all of that said and done, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy videos like this, share this around so I can grow as a channel, leave some comments down below to make the algorithm happy, check out the playlist for Return to Skylands, its Discord if you want to help, and the lore I've covered so far in the description below, along with the music, and I will see you all in the next one.
Neon Batteries, good video. There's some interesting stuff in my recommended, huh?